So in that last video I had some comments, and remember our last two videos were concerning a code practice oscillator. And I think we've got that straightened out. But some of the comments, hold it here, hey! Some of the comments that I got with that video were concerning the two pictures that I showed at the beginning. One of a 150-in-1 kit from Radio Shack, and the other being the actually home broadcaster and receiver from Remco that was sold through various stores. And I thought that hit a nerve, and I really would like to go through some of those early toys like this one that had a great influence on me. This is not the actual Sears base station, the General Electric base station sold by Sears that I had as a kid, but it is exactly the same model and the same radio that I had in my bedroom as a kid. And this thing had a lot of influence on me, and my buddy who also got his ham ticket, he was a couple blocks away, 3 blocks away, with a similar type base station unit. We used to call these CB base stations. You know, they're 100 milliwatt, license-free type things for kids. And this had a big influence on me. As you notice, it has a code key. And this is how we learned CW. We learned it on channel 14 of the CB band using these kinds of radios. So this is one that I picked up at the Elmira Hamfest, which is located in Horseheads, New York, which is in the southern tier of western New York. And I said, oh my God, that's my childhood base station. I've got to collect that back. So it needs some help, it needs some work, but let's go through and see what some of these really popular electronics kit toys were. Let's go through a few of them, and let's talk about how they might have influenced your entry into electronics, ham radio, CB, or just as a hobby. How did it influence your schooling? How did it influence going to college? How did these toys influence your life? Did they make a career available to you that you would not have had without that toy that you received? Was Radio Shack really the kickoff of your successful engineering career? Let's talk about that in this video, about kids' toys and what electronic toys, especially in the 60s and 70s, had to do with this aging population of electronic boomers.
So in the last video I had a lot of interest in maybe explaining what the 150-in-1 electronic project kit was all about. This was a big deal. Of course, if you were to look at all of the different kits, you'd have everything from a 10-in-1 to a 1,000-in-1, I think. They'd used up just about every number combination they could come up with. And the 150-in-1, though, was quite popular. And if you look at this kit, you can see it's got a nice relay, it's got a lamp you can hook up, and these springs, basically the wires that you have over here, have stripped ends, and they basically just go in between the spring, and there's your contact. So to wire up a project like a little amplifier, you'd connect the transformer down to a transistor, and then the output of the transistor and the input of another transformer, and so on. But it gave you potentiometers, transformers, a speaker on board, various resistors and capacitors, a solar cell, a cadmium sulfide photocell, and different diodes, a 7-segment display. Looks like it's a direct coupled kind of a faux op-amp integrated circuit, and a switch, a ferrite loop stick, a tuning capacitor, variable capacitor, some type of 9-volt battery source, or a 3-volt AA cell holder. So this was a great way to get started with electronics. I actually have a brother-in-law who was a sales guy who wanted to kind of reinvent himself. And by using a kit like this, he was able to educate himself just in time for the 1990s cellular and electronics revolution that occurred, and he became a very successful electronics parts salesman, knowing absolutely nothing about this until he bought the 150-in-1 electronic project kit from Radio Shack. There were also some questions on the transistor radio and broadcast system. This is another Radio Shack item. It was sold by different companies, but Remcraft. Here we go. Basically, this was a simple crystal radio that had a built-in transistor amplifier that worked on the headphones, and it also had enough gain in the amplifier to drive a speaker. There was no RF transmit function here, even though you'd think, oh, it must be a transmitter that I can transmit to a nearby radio. No, it's not like that. You're simply amplifying your voice, and it comes out the speaker. So that's what this is all about. It's just a simple radio and a PA system for your voice. Here's another version. These all came in different colors, and the dates on some of these go from the late 50s up through the late 70s. Ooh, this one's bright. Somebody must have turned up the saturation on this picture. So anyway, some of the features of these kits, built-in code key that you could hook up to the circuit. And in the back, this is what it looks like. These are the components hooked up to those spring terminals. Here's our code practice oscillator. Just one of the circuits you could make with the 150-in-1 project kit. Isn't that handy? The 9-volt battery clip. There's your various wires with the stripped ends that you put into those springs. Now another one, and I had one of these given to me. This was the Remco crystal radio, and Remcraft, Remco, whatever. This is another one that lasted forever. They probably made these from the early 60s into the 70s. And this is a crystal set. They actually included the earphone with it, so you could theoretically hear a station. I think I heard exactly one station on my crystal radio. Thank heavens for the Alfred Morgan first book of radio and electronics, which taught me how to make a proper crystal radio. But somebody thought I needed this, so I had this kit. They were very inexpensive, probably like $5 at the time. And I remember there was this ball mechanism that contacted the front of the coil, and that's how you tuned it. Not much to this crystal radio. No variable capacitor, just a tapped coil. So some of you might have been exposed to radio and noticed that there were these other bands. These bands that included aircraft, the police band, shortwave, and this would have been interesting to you. And sometimes these portable sets, they might not have even been in your family. They might have been in a neighbor, or perhaps a relative owned one of these radios. But this was enough to gain your interest. And these radios were really addictive. Once you started playing with them, you suddenly became interested in shortwave broadcasts. Now, this is a radio that I was also given from Sears. I'm going to say around 1968. I was probably 10 or 12 years old, and I got one of these Elenco receivers. This is a really interesting receiver because it's basically a pocket radio type design inside with just 5 or 6 transistors. But they give you a trimmer and these plug-in coils that went in the top. You had these coils that you'd plug in for various bands. So this is kind of a solid state version of the simple plug-in coil receiver. It's a simple super heterodyne, ran on 4.5 volts, and you plug in the antenna and the oscillator coil, and you're on the air. Oh, how about the old scanner? This might have gotten you interested in electronics. Maybe an uncle, or maybe you had a police scanner nut in your family. This might have gotten you into the hobby. These scanners were very, very popular in the 70s. And how about the police band listening in on all the action in your town? The war on drugs on full display at your fingertips. Finally, kind of in this oddball way, Western Electric and the Bell system was trying to recruit young minds. Hearts and souls, young minds need to have modern electronics in their hands, and they secreted these kits to the various high schools so that you would be exposed to the solar battery, their invention, the transistor, their invention, and that's why we have solar cells and electric vehicles today, I guess. Blame it on the Bell system. It's Bell Labs' fault. So maybe you were kind of into music and you wanted to have professional lighting in your bedroom. Well, the psycho light was sure to upset the whole family. And I think if you added some black lights to this, you would really have something that's exciting. Of course, you might have been twanging a guitar, and maybe a fuzz box kit might have been something that got you excited. These fuzz boxes are quite collectible, and people are still building fuzz boxes to this day. Popular kit. Oh, the old Lafayette subminiature amplifier. I'm going to make my own stereo for only $3. And I built my own speakers in high school with the help of an uncle that had a really nice wood shop. And those are in the hands of my first harmonic. And he has a full disc library of vinyl, and my old Garrard turntable, an amplifier, and my homemade speakers. Wow, here we go, an electronic organ kit. This is for the future synthesizer guru for electronic music scene that would be coming in the 80s and 90s. So you might not have built your own speaker with a homemade port or a bass reflex system, but every kid probably had a walkie-talkie. You got to have a walkie-talkie. I mean, you got to play war games, run around the neighborhood, communicate with your friends, and this meant you needed some type of communication device. You might recognize some of these devices. All of them operated under 15.205. That is license-free. Basically, you had an antenna length limit and a power limit of around 100 milliwatts. And these were all small handheld units, usually with one, at the most two channels. Now, if your parents happened to buy you the Remco walkie-talkies, you might have wondered, "Hey Ma, what's all this wire? I thought this was wireless." Not quite with the Remcos. It's more like World War II field phone technology. And there were a lot of imports being made. The Japanese import walkie-talkies were ubiquitous, I guess you'd say, and every kind of fancy, shiny walkie-talkie was coming out. Most of the very, very simple ones were super regenerative receivers with a 2-transistor transmitter and a simple modulator transformer that doubled as a speaker transformer. These were very, very simple walkie-talkies, and you might remember of them. You might remember that they squealed or screeched constantly. That's what we're talking about. These were the early super regen walkies. Here's some other ones you guys might have had as kids. Some of them were starting to include code keys by the mid-70s. Midland. Now, this was a little higher grade walkie. The Midlands were actually super heterodyne receivers. And these are a little bit of an upgrade from the simple super regen walkies that I was talking about before. Now this one even has a split. It's using two different frequencies. Yeah, the Midlands were a much higher grade than I could afford. Well, Radio Shack got into the action, and of course they were doing a lot of 100 milliwatt walkie-talkies, and eventually they started to do 1, 2, 3 watt walkies when the licensing became much easier, and some of these were multi-channel and eventually up to 23 channels. Of course, at these higher powers, you did have to license the unit. Wink, wink. So, the base station. Here's a Sears base station. This is an early one, but this is basically the same circuit that's used in most of them. And they all seem to have the AM broadcast band as well as the CB frequencies tunable. And usually they transmitted on just one frequency. Usually it was channel 14. And again, 100 milliwatts, 15.205 license-free operation. Here's some Russian walkie-talkies. How did these get in there? But notice, even the Russian walkie-talkies have the code key built in by this time. Oh yeah, very nice. Oh, here's the one that my buddy Dwayne had. We would talk to each other from my Sears base station, which was a General Electric, to his Archer Space Patrol base station, 3 blocks, and we had a great time sending code on channel 14. Okay, Coleco, this is probably a little bit later, and I don't even know what that is. Interesting. So you might have gotten one of the science fair kits at Radio Shack. Here's one that's a lie detector kit. This is fun at parties. Oh yeah, hook people up to this thing. Or maybe you were a budding police detective and you wanted to fingerprint all of your friends. This might be fun. Ooh, the Peab Boox kits. Do people remember the Peab Boox kits? This was something that was very special at Radio Shack. Imagine a plastic perforated box that, of course, if you soldered would melt and stink. You guys remember these Peab Boox kits. You could make all kinds of fun projects. Of course, the most desirable one I just showed you, which was the tube type shortwave regen. But there were many kits out there. Everything from power supplies to code oscillator kits and meters and intercom amplifiers, wireless AM mics, you name it. These things were a lot of fun. And the 3 transistor shortwave was popular. The tube is very collectible. Look at this. Tube AM radio kit, $4.95. Tube shortwave radio kit, $7.95. I'll bet they're worth more than that now. And of course the crystal radio kit was very popular with its ferrite tuned coil with the various taps. And this kit went on pretty much forever at Radio Shack. And you add a couple transistors and you can really start to hear things. Now, there were those of you that weren't as interested in radio and were getting into the budding computer industry. So there were some science fair kits that got you into digital electronics. Now, this is an advanced digital logic lab that includes a single quad NAND gate. So one chip here, but you got to start somewhere. You can do a lot with one NAND gate, a quad. And 25 experiments in digital logic circuit. Okay, so we could go on forever with this wonderful lineup of circuits and ideas that might have sparked the interest of a young, budding ham radio operator, electronics technician, engineer, or possibly a teacher. And it all started with a simple kit or exposure to some ham, CBer, or scanner enthusiast. And pretty soon you were on your way and wanting to learn more and more electronics. I hope you've enjoyed this little foray into all of our toys that got us started into the electronics world.
I hope you enjoyed this little discovery lane into your childhood and some of the toys that, electronic toys that might have changed your career path or your hobby path. This is the remnants of an Elenco shortwave receiver. I had one of these as a kid too. I wish I had a complete one, but I've got parts of one at least. This receiver, which was marketed in the late 60s and early 70s, was another thing you could get at Sears or some of the other department stores. And it featured plug-in coils. It was a solid-state receiver, similar to any pocket radio with just 5 or 6 transistors. But it had a separate oscillator and antenna coils that you could plug in. Therefore, it would cover all of these bands. Very cool receiver, and it really got me going on shortwave listening. So this is another example of kind of a kiddie version of a shortwave receiver that could really get you involved in the hobby very quickly. So it had plug-in coils that took you all the way up to 30 megahertz. So I was able to copy 10 meters, for instance, for the first time on this simple receiver.